There are moments in life that do not announce themselves. They do not come with warning signs or loud alarms. They arrive quietly, dressed as nothing more than a small choice, a brief thought, or a single second of hesitation. And sometimes, those moments carry enough weight to change a person forever. This is the story of one such moment. A story about a man named Daniel. A story that is not extraordinary because of what happened to him, but because of how ordinary everything was right before it did. Daniel was 29 years old. He worked as a site supervisor for a construction company located about 2 hours outside the city, where he lived with his wife, Maya, and their 7-year-old daughter, Zara. The job was not glamorous, but Daniel took pride in it. He was the kind of man who arrived early and left last. He cared about the work, cared about the people under him, and carried that responsibility seriously every single day. On that particular evening, in early November, Daniel had stayed even later than usual. There had been a problem with one of the delivery schedules, and he had spent the better part of 3 hours on phone calls, coordinating, fixing, managing. By the time he finally signed off and walked to his car, the sky was already dark and heavy with clouds. He checked his phone. It was a few minutes past 9. He had 2 missed calls from Maya. He called her back as he buckled his seatbelt. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and a little teasing. She told him that Zara had refused to go to bed without saying goodnight to him. She told him dinner was still on the stove, staying warm, waiting. She told him to drive safe. He laughed softly, told her he would be home in 2 hours, maybe less if the road was clear. He said he loved her. She said it back. He ended the call and set the phone face down on the passenger seat. The drive started normally. Daniel merged onto the highway and settled into the familiar rhythm of the road. He had driven this route hundreds of times. He knew every curve, every long straight stretch, every exit sign. The radio played something low and forgettable in the background. The heater hummed. The headlights pushed through the dark ahead of him. Everything felt ordinary. Everything felt exactly like every other night he had driven home from that job. But about 40 minutes into the drive, something shifted. It started as a heaviness behind his eyes. Not painful, just present. A slow, quiet pulling sensation. He blinked hard and sat up a little straighter in his seat. He turned the radio up slightly. He cracked the window just enough to let a thin line of cold air reach his face. These were the small tricks every tired driver knows. The little negotiations we make with our bodies when we do not want to admit what they are trying to tell us. He had passed a rest stop about 15 minutes back. He remembered seeing the blue sign, the bright lights, the small cluster of parked trucks. He had thought about stopping. The thought had lasted maybe 4 seconds before he dismissed it. He was not that tired, he had told himself. He was almost halfway home. Stopping would only make the drive longer. The dinner was warm. Zara was waiting. It did not seem worth it. It seemed like the kind of decision that barely even qualified as a decision. He rolled the window down a little more and turned the air up. The cold helped briefly. He felt more alert for a few minutes. He even felt slightly foolish for having worried about it at all. See, he thought, you are fine. Just keep going. The road ahead was nearly empty. Just the white dashes of the lane markers appearing and disappearing under his headlights, and the occasional red glow of a vehicle far ahead. Just the night and the car and the hum of the engine beneath him. It is impossible to know, even now, exactly what happened in the seconds that followed. The mind does not keep records of the moments, it loses consciousness. There is no clean memory of the eyes closing, no snapshot of the head beginning to drop. 1 second Daniel was driving, and then, somewhere in that vast and unrecorded dark, 3 seconds passed. 3 seconds. It sounds like nothing. It sounds like the time it takes to exhale, to blink twice, to read a single sentence. But at highway speed, 3 seconds is the length of an entire tragedy. The car drifted. Not dramatically, not with a sudden jerk. Just a slow, silent migration toward the left. The tires crossed the lane marker without a sound. And then the front corner of the car met the concrete divider. The impact was not clean. There was no single, sharp collision. There was a grinding shriek of metal, a violent lurch, and then the world turned sideways. The car hit the divider, bounced off, and rolled. Once, twice, coming to rest on the shoulder of the road, with its wheels pointing at the dark sky above. Daniel did not remember the impact. He did not remember the rolling, or the shattering of glass, or the terrible sound of metal against asphalt. The first thing he was aware of was silence. A deep, ringing silence that pressed in from every direction. And then pain. Not a single sharp point of pain, but something vast and total. A pain that seemed to occupy his entire body all at once. He tried to move and could not understand why he could not. He tried to speak and heard nothing come out of his own mouth. The first person to reach him was a truck driver who had been half a mile behind and had watched the whole thing unfold in the dark ahead of him. He pulled over and called emergency services before he even reached the car. He stayed on the phone the entire time, speaking calmly to the dispatcher, describing what he saw. He later said that the car looked like something that had been dropped from a great height. He said he was not sure, at first, whether anyone inside could have survived it. The paramedics arrived within 11 minutes. They found Daniel conscious, but barely responsive, his body pinned awkwardly by the collapsed frame of the car. It took them nearly 25 minutes to extract him safely. His left arm was broken in 2 places. 3 of his ribs were fractured. He had a significant laceration across his forehead that had bled heavily. His right collarbone had been fractured by the seatbelt, which had also almost certainly saved his life. He was airlifted to the nearest trauma center 40 miles away. Maya received the call at 11:43 in the evening. She was standing in the kitchen, having just checked the stove for the 3rd time, wondering why Daniel had not sent a message to say he was nearly home. The voice on the phone was calm and professional, the kind of calm that people are trained to use when they deliver news that undoes everything. She sat down on the kitchen floor before she even knew she had started to fall. Zara was asleep in the next room, dreaming whatever 7-year-olds dream, unaware that her world had just shifted on its axis. Maya drove to the hospital with her sister, who had come within 15 minutes of the call. They sat in a waiting room that smelled of antiseptic and weak coffee, saying very little. There is nothing adequate to say in those rooms. The words available to human beings in moments like that are simply not enough for what is being felt. They held hands. They watched the clock. They waited for news that took a long time to come. Daniel spent 4 days in the intensive care unit. He had surgery to stabilize his collarbone and to address internal bruising that the doctors had been monitoring carefully. He was in and out of consciousness for most of those first days. The pain medication made everything feel distant and underwater. He remembered fragments. Maya's face closer than seemed possible. The sound of a machine beeping steadily somewhere to his left. A nurse with a kind voice who adjusted something near his arm without waking him. When he was finally fully conscious and able to understand what was being told to him, he lay very still in the hospital bed and listened as the doctor explained what had happened to his body and what the recovery would look like. Months. That was the word that settled into his chest like a stone. Not weeks. Months of physical therapy, months of limited movement, months of pain that would fade slowly and unevenly. The car was a total loss. His job site would have to manage without him for an extended period. Every plan, every routine, every ordinary expectation of his daily life had been shattered in 3 seconds. Maya brought Zara to see him on the 5th day. He was sitting up slightly in the bed, his arm in a support brace, a thick bandage across his forehead. Zara stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the sight of her father in the hospital bed, the machines, the tubes, the unfamiliar room. Then she walked to him carefully, as if she was afraid he might break further, and laid her small head very gently against his good side. She did not say anything for a long time. Neither did he. There was nothing that needed to be said between them in that moment. The weight of her head against his ribs was the clearest and most complete thing in the room. The months of recovery were their own kind of education. Daniel had never been a person who sat still easily. He had always been defined by his movement, his output, his ability to show up and work and carry things. And now he could not carry anything heavier than a glass of water without pain shooting through his shoulder and down his side. He sat in the living room while Maya did the things he used to do. He watched Zara do her homework at the kitchen table and could not pick up her bag or help her reach things on the top shelf. The helplessness of it was its own slow weight, separate from the physical pain, pressing down on him in a different place entirely. He did not talk about it much in those early weeks. He was not the kind of man who processed things through conversation. He processed them by working, and since working was not an option, he processed them by going very quiet. Maya understood this about him. She did not push. She moved around the house with a kind of careful competence, managing everything that needed managing, keeping Zara's routine as normal as possible, sitting next to Daniel in the evenings without requiring anything from him. She was, in those months, one of the strongest people he had ever known, and he had not told her that enough before all of this happened. His physical therapist was a man named Roy, who was in his late 50s, lean and direct, with a habit of speaking plainly and without unnecessary softness. On their second session together, Roy asked Daniel to tell him what had happened. Not the medical version, the real version. Daniel told him about the rest stop, about the 4 seconds of consideration and the decision to keep going. Roy listened without interrupting. When Daniel finished, Roy nodded once and said very simply that he had heard that same story from dozens of people over the years. Different roads, different times, different bodies lying on different tables, but always the same 4 seconds. Always the same rest stop passed at speed. Always the same quiet certainty that stopping was not worth it. That conversation stayed with Daniel. The idea that his 4 seconds were not unique to him, that somewhere on a highway right now, at this very moment, there was another person making the same small calculation, talking themselves through the same logic. Almost home. Not that tired. Does not make sense to stop now. The universality of it was not comforting. It was terrifying, because it meant that what happened to him was not a rare accident. It was a common one. It happened constantly to ordinary, careful people in the ordinary dark hours between work and home. There was one evening about 6 weeks into his recovery that Daniel would later say was the turning point. Not a dramatic turning point. Not a moment of sudden revelation. Just a quiet Tuesday evening when the light was going orange through the living room window, and Zara had fallen asleep on the couch next to him, her feet tucked under his good leg, her breathing slow and easy. He sat very still so as not to wake her. He watched her sleep. He watched the rise and fall of her small ribcage, the way her eyelashes rested against her cheek, the way her fingers were loosely curled near her chin. He sat with the full weight of how close he had come to never seeing this again. And something in him shifted quietly and permanently, in a way that no amount of physical therapy could have reached. He thought about what Zara would have been told. He thought about Maya sitting her down and trying to find words for something that has no adequate words. He thought about Zara growing up with a photograph on a shelf instead of a father in a chair. He thought about all the small, ordinary things he would have missed. The homework at the kitchen table, the Sunday mornings, the arguments about what to watch on television, the completely unremarkable Tuesday evenings with the orange light. All of it, gone because of 4 seconds and a rest stop sign passed at speed. The thought did not make him feel sorry for himself. It made him feel the full scale of what he had almost surrendered without even knowing he was surrendering it. His return to work was slow and monitored. His employer had been patient, far more patient than Daniel had expected, and his team had managed well in his absence. On his first day back, he sat in the site office and went through the backlog of paperwork and felt something that was difficult to name, a kind of gratitude that was too large for its container. He looked at his hands on the desk, the left one still slightly weaker than it used to be, and thought about how unremarkable it was to sit at a desk and do paperwork, and how for 4 months he had not been able to do it, and how he would never again take the unremarkable for granted in the same way. He made a point of calling a meeting with his team on his second week back. He did not make it a formal thing. He brought coffee and sat with them in the break room at lunch, and he told them what had happened. Not the sanitized version, the real version, the rest stop, the 4 seconds, the way reasonable and responsible felt from the inside, in the moments before everything went wrong. He watched their faces as he talked. He saw recognition in some of them. The small, uncomfortable recognition of a person who has done the same calculation and come out the other side safely, through no particular virtue of their own, only luck. One of the younger men on his team, a 24-year-old named Cole, who drove an hour each way to the site every day, said very little during the meeting. But he came to Daniel afterward, when the others had gone back to work, and said simply that he appreciated him saying it, that he had done that drive tired more times than he could count, that he had never really thought about what he was risking, that he would think about it differently now. Daniel shook his hand and said that was all he had hoped for. That was the only thing telling the story had ever been about. In the weeks that followed, Daniel had a great deal of time to think. Recovery from that kind of injury does not allow for distraction. There is no escaping into busyness or work or activity. There is only stillness and pain and time. And in that time, the mind returns again and again to the moment it cannot fully remember. He thought about the rest stop sign he had passed without slowing down. He thought about the 4 seconds he had considered stopping and then dismissed the idea. He thought about all the small, confident calculations he had made in the dark, all the ways he had told himself he was fine, he was managing, he was almost there. He thought about how certain he had been. That was what stayed with him most. He had not been reckless in the way people imagine recklessness. He had not been careless or thoughtless or irresponsible in any obvious way. He was a responsible man. He wore his seatbelt. He did not drink. He followed the speed limit. He had simply been tired and had told himself that tired was manageable and had chosen the destination over the warning. And that one quiet, confident, ordinary choice had cost him 4 months of his life, had cost his family 4 months of fear and adjustment and grief, and had come within a margin of error of costing him everything. He spoke about it later, after his recovery, to anyone who would listen, not with drama, not with the need for sympathy. He spoke about it plainly, the way a person speaks about a thing they have turned over in their mind so many times that they know every side of it. He told the story of the rest stop sign. He told the story of the 4 seconds. He said that the most dangerous thing about that night was not the dark road or the late hour or the empty highway. The most dangerous thing was how reasonable his decision had seemed at the time. Because that is the truth that most of us do not want to look at directly. Dangerous decisions rarely feel dangerous in the moment we make them. They feel like small adjustments, minor calculations, sensible compromises. They feel like the right call for a person who is otherwise responsible and careful and aware. They arrive dressed as practicality, as efficiency, as the voice that says you are almost there. Do not stop now. You have done this 100 times before. And by the time you understand what you were really deciding, the moment has already passed, and the road has already taken what it is owed. Daniel came home in early spring. He walked through his front door on a Tuesday afternoon, his arm still in a partial brace, moving more carefully than he used to. Zara had made a sign with her crayons and taped it to the inside of the front door. It said in her large, uneven handwriting, "Welcome home, Daddy." He stood in the doorway for a long moment and read those 3 words. Then he sat down on the front step in the pale afternoon sun and did something he had not done in front of anyone in a very long time. He cried, not from pain, not from relief, exactly, but from the sharp and overwhelming understanding of how close he had come to never seeing that sign at all. The dinner had been warm. Zara had been waiting. He had known that, and it had mattered to him. And there is nothing wrong with wanting to get home to the people you love. But the road does not care about dinner. It does not care about the child waiting or the wife who called twice. It does not slow down for love or for loyalty or for the very good reasons a person has for wanting to push through one more hour of dark highway. The road is indifferent, and in that indifference lives a lesson that Daniel carries with him every single day since. Stop when your body tells you to stop. Pull over when your eyes grow heavy. Let the dinner wait. Let the arrival be delayed. Let the people who love you wait a little longer in exchange for the certainty that you will actually arrive. No destination has ever been worth more than the life that is trying to reach it. Not the warm dinner. Not the child's good night. Not the feeling of finally being home after a long and exhausting day. None of it. Because none of those things exist without you there to receive them. Daniel still drives that highway. He drives it every working day back and forth, the same road, the same stretch of dark between his job and his home. But he drives it differently now. He knows the rest stops by their mile markers. He knows the exit numbers of the places where he can pull off and give himself 10 minutes of stillness before continuing. He does not negotiate with his tiredness anymore. He does not make small calculations about how much further he can push. When his body sends the signal, he listens. He pulls over. He stops. Because he learned what so many of us learn only when it is almost too late, and what some of us never get the chance to learn at all. That the road does not give second chances out of kindness. It gave him one not because he deserved it, but because the margin happened to fall in his favor that night. The numbers worked out. The angle was survivable. Another night on another stretch of road, with slightly different physics they might not have. He knows that. He lives with that knowledge quietly. The way you live with anything that has changed the shape of how you see the world. If you are reading this or hearing this, and you are tired right now, and you are behind the wheel of a car or thinking about getting behind the wheel of a car, this story is for you. Not as a warning delivered from a distance. As a truth from someone who sat in a hospital bed and counted what 3 seconds had taken from him. Stop. Rest. Let the road wait. The people who love you want you home, yes. But more than that, they want you alive. They want you whole. They want to see your face walk through the door and not just receive a phone call in the dark of the night telling them that you did not make it. Daniel's daughter still has that crayon sign. Maya kept it after he came home, folded it carefully, and put it in a drawer in the kitchen. Sometimes Zara takes it out and looks at it, though she is older now and would be embarrassed to admit it. It is just a piece of paper with 3 words on it. But in this family, it means something more than that. It is the sign that was there to welcome home a man who almost was not there to read it. And every time Daniel passes that stretch of highway, every time he sees the blue glow of a rest stop sign in the dark, he remembers. He slows down. He pulls over. He stops. Because he is not just driving anymore. He is keeping a promise to his daughter, a promise to his wife, and most of all, a promise to himself. To the version of himself that lay broken in a hospital bed and understood, finally and completely, that no destination is worth more than the life trying to reach it.